Hey guys, this is Mark. In this lecture, we'll talk about updating existing objects in a database. And what that means is changing one or many properties of that object in the persistence in the database storage. In order to implement object update and use that functionality, there's really just one codeless block, and you will see it's very straightforward to use. And to understand how it works, let's just jump into an example and see it in action. The example that I have in mind will include updating some data in the country database. Let me switch to the backend. And here you see a list of the countries. This information, we got it from something like 2013. Therefore, some of the data or a lot of the data would be outdated. Like, for instance, the head of state. For many of the countries, the head of state has changed. I can still see references to George W. Bush, for instance. The GNP has changed and so on. So let's create an application where we get a list of the countries, where we select one, and we update that information for any given country. To simplify retrieval, I will use the data table component. Of course, in the data table component, it already supports update. So you see this allow edit will give you an ability to edit those records directly in data table. But what I wanted to show you is how you can do it outside of the data table, because there will be plenty of use cases when you need to do it directly. So let's connect this data table to the country table. Here's country. Let's configure the columns, eliminate the ones we do not need. So for instance, we will not be changing surface, area, region. Let's ignore population, local name, life expectancy, independence here, form of government, and let's just keep name. We can eliminate continent. So name, GNP, and head of state is going to be good enough. So click OK, and we will just pull all the countries, and when one is selected, we want to display the details of the selected country in some form down below. So to do this, let's drag a block into here, select this block, and change the flex grow to 1, so it will take up all the available space, and add input components into this block. So this one will be for name. Of course, name will not be changing, but we still want to display it. The second one will be for GNP, gross national product, GNP, which I believe is going to be a number. And the third one will be the head of state. Head of state. Finally, let's add a button into here, and we can make this button a little bit smaller, just so it aligns itself on the right hand side. And let's call this button update. So that's the logic right there. Let's call this block country details. And let's make it a data container, because whenever a record is selected in the data table, we will use that single record as the data model for the entire block. This way, if we map the data binding for these fields to the names of the columns as the properties, then whenever we select the row, these fields will be automatically populated with the necessary data. So I have selected name. Let's go to data binding, and here the value logic will be bound to name. For GNP, it's also going to be GNP. And for head of state, it needs to be exactly as it's written here, head of state. Head of state. Now, I'm running this example on the newer version of UI Builder. We did a release today, and in here you will see that whenever you go to data binding, unlike in the previous videos, for the head of state, for instance, it will tell you exactly the actual component where it's going to be looking for this data from, or where the container with the data binding will occur. And it says bind property value from the country details data model. And country details is our block, this block. So I think that this is a very convenient way to let you know, so you know exactly where the data model will reside. Now let's select data table and go to the logic for it. And on record selected, click the add logic button. So this record selected, this is the selected record, which is the actual country object. And in data containers, you will see set data model to. And then the country details is already selected. So drag selected record, and this takes care of the assignment of the data automatically. Even though the update logic is not there, let's see what it looks like, whether we get the behavior that we want. Run it in the preview. So now we got our country. So if we select one, as you can see, the details are automatically populated in our form. So if we start paging, it works uniformly. Good. Let's close this, and now let's implement the actual update. So what will happen is, as soon as you type in the information into here, it will update the actual underlying country object, and that country object just needs to be flushed, needs to be sent to the server, so the data that we type in here will be updated also in the database. Select the update button and go to logic, and in the on-click event, click the add logic. In here, country details data is the actual country object, because that's the data model of the container where this button is at. To add the logic to update in the database, go into Data API, and here you see this save object in backendless. That's the block you need to use to actually update that object in the database. So drag it out into the click event. The table is going to be country, and then the object will be this. And as you can see, this is very straightforward. However, in some cases, you may need to compose this object. What's important to understand is whenever you're saving object in a database, in order to update it, this object needs to have the object ID property. The way backendless works is if the object ID property is a part of this object, then it will run an update. If object ID is not there, it will create a new one. So this object ID tells the backendless, hey, I'm an existing object, here's my ID, update whatever the properties I have in here. And through data binding, we get the benefit that this country details data, the data model, which is the country object, will already have all the information that you type in those input fields. So this data binding gives us the tremendous benefit of creating smaller logic. And finally, once it is done, we probably just need to give some sort of notification to the user that the object has been updated. And in order to do this, what we can do is add another block under the button. And in here, let's add text. And this text can say, object has been updated. We can center this content right here, and then change the height of this block so it is not as tall. And possibly we could change the width to be, for example, 30%. And we can also center this block like this. And then just indicate with the color that this is a success. So it's going to be green. Good. And by default, this block does not need to be visible. And we can call it status block. So now if we go back to update into this logic, we can change the visibility of the status block and make it visible. That's all it's going to take. So now let's run it in the preview. And let's modify any of these countries. I don't really know which one to start because I don't really know who the head of state is. Let's just display maybe more objects so I can recognize something. For instance, Bulgaria. And let me just Google who the head of state is for Bulgaria. So it's Rumen Radev. So let's set it to Rumen Radev. And same thing for the GNP. So it's 156 billion PPP dollars. I guess that's the local currency. Let's just say it's going to be 20,000. Okay, just as a demo. Now, by the way, notice that as I make changes here, the data in the data table is automatically modified as well, even though the data is not saved. This is once again through data binding, because this form right here modifies the underlying country object, and that country object is also used as the data model for the data table. Now, when we click update, request goes to the server, and now object has been updated. So in fact, if we go to the backend and find Bulgaria there, we see that the head of state is now Mr. Radev, and then the GNP is whatever we put in there. So this demonstrates that the object has been updated in the database as well. That's it, guys. So you can see that this is very straightforward, a single block that does the update in the database. I hope you found this useful. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy Kotless coding.